Being the eldest daughter comes with responsibilities at least. That's what my parents have always told me, and for the longest time, I believed them. I thought I was doing my part for filling some unspoken duty that came with being the successful one in the family. At 34, I had built a stable life for myself. I worked as an engineer at a well-known tech company, earning a salary that many would envy. I owned my own apartment. Not extravagant but mine. Yet despite all of that, there was one thing that weighed heavier on me than mortgage payments, or late-night work shifts. The $3. I sent my parents every single month. It started as a temporary solution. When the pandemic hit, my parents' handcrafted furniture business collapsed. Orders stopped coming in, bills piled up, and soon they were drowning in debt. I stepped in without hesitation. That's what family does, right? We help each other. But temporary turned into permanent. 3 years later, that monthly check had become less of a gift and more of an obligation. The worst part, and never seemed to be enough. Family comes first. Alice, my mom, Linda, would remind me during our weekly calls. We're so proud of you, sweetheart. But you know, things are still really tight over here. It was never a direct demand, just enough guilt to make me feel like I should do more. And maybe they were right. I didn't have kids. I didn't have a spouse. No huge expenses beyond my own. Compared to my co-workers who complained about private school fees and home renovations, my life was simple. Still, I couldn't ignore the resentment creeping in. Every month, I sent the money. Every month, the requests continued. Utilities were rising. The house needed repairs. My brother, Michael, was struggling to provide for his 2 kids after his divorce. There was always something. I kept telling myself that this was what being a good daughter meant. That as long as I could afford it, I should keep helping. Then Thanksgiving came around and everything changed. Thanksgiving had always been an obligation rather than a celebration. I hadn't missed a single one in years. Even when work got crazy, or when I barely had the energy to show up, skipping it wasn't an option, not with the way my mom, Linda, talked about family unity as if it were a sacred law. So, like every year, I packed up my car and made the drive to my parents' home. This time, I even brought a 55-inch smart TV as a gift. I knew they would never buy one themselves, and I thought maybe, just maybe, it would be a nice gesture, a peace offering of sorts. But the second I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. The house was quiet, not in the peaceful holiday kind of way, but in the something is wrong, and nobody is talking about it kind of way. When my mom opened the door, her smile was thin, forced. She gave me a quick hug, barely looking at me before hurrying off to the kitchen. My dad, Richard, gave me a nod from his spot in the living room, but said nothing. The air was thick, like walking into a room where an argument had just ended. Then, there was Michael. He was in the kitchen, helping set the table. My younger brother divorced, struggling and living back home with his kids. We had never been particularly close, but I had tried to support him when his marriage fell apart. Yet, as I walked in, he shot me a look that felt sharper than any words he could have said. You know they're upset with you, right? He muttered as he leaned closer, pretending to adjust a tray of side dishes. I blinked. What? They think you should be doing more, he said, his voice low but pointed. Before I could respond, he turned away, busying himself with rearranging the food, leaving me standing there with my stomach twisting into knots. The tension only grew as we all sat down for dinner. At first things were normal small talk, forced laughter, the usual dance we did every year, but it didn't take long for the conversation to shift. The cost of everything isn't saying these days. My mom sighed dramatically. Electricity, groceries, the mortgage, it's just never ending. Dad chimed in. We've been trying to keep up, but it's tough. We've had to dip into savings just to make ends meet. I nodded along, but the unease in my gut was growing. I knew where this was going, before they even said it. And then my father sighed and finally dropped the bomb. Alice, the $3,000 you send us each month, it's not enough anymore. Silence. I felt my pulse in my ears. He kept talking, listing off expenses like it was a financial report. The mortgage, the kids' school needs, medical bills. The numbers blurred together, but the message was clear. They wanted me to send $6. Now. I let out a breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I can't afford that, I said evenly. I already pay for most of the bills, and I just bought you that TV. My mom's voice shook as she cut me off. It's not about a TV, Alice. It's about family. You act like you're doing enough, but we're still struggling. You have a good job. You don't have kids. You could help more. And then Michael, my own brother, looked me dead in the eye and said, "You don't know what it's like to actually struggle." The words hit like a slap. I stared at them, at the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and realized something had shifted. It wasn't about love. It wasn't even about need anymore. It was about expectation. And no matter how much I gave, it was never going to be enough. I don't remember much of the rest of that dinner. Not the taste of the food, not the warmth of the room, not even how long I sat there after my parents dropped their demand like a mom in the middle of the table. All I remember is the weight in my chest, pressing down like a stone, making it hard to breathe. I had expected guilt trips, maybe even a passive-aggressive comment or two, but I hadn't expected them to outright tell me that what I was doing wasn't enough, that I wasn't enough. The conversation kept going without me, as if my silence was just a brief pause in their financial planning session. My mom went on about the rising cost of groceries. My dad started mentioning house repairs that urgently needed to be done. Michael chimed in about how expensive it was to raise 2 kids alone. It was like they had all rehearsed this in advance, each one playing their part in a performance where I was the only one who hadn't been given a script. Finally, I forced myself to speak. "I can't afford to send $6,000 a month," I said, my voice steady even though my hands felt cold. "I have my own expenses. I have my own life." My mom's fork clattered against her plate. "Your own life," she repeated, as if the words personally offended her. "And what about your family, Alice? Do we not count? Have we not given you everything? Given me everything?" The laugh that slipped out was bitter, sharp. "I've sent you almost $100,000. In the past 3 years. That's more than most people ever get from their kids in a lifetime. What more do you want?" Dad exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "That's not the point. The point is, we're still struggling. And you're in a position to help. But instead of stepping up, you're acting like we're burdening you." I wanted to scream. Instead, I took a deep breath, gripping the edge of the table so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Because you are burdening me," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. The room went dead silent. Mom looked at me like I had just slapped her. "How can you say that?" Michael scoffed, pushing his plate away. "Wow. Just wow. Must be nice, huh? Living in your fancy apartment. Making 6 figures, spending your money however you want. Meanwhile, the rest of us are drowning. And you're whining about helping your own family." That was it. That was the moment something inside me cracked. I pushed my chair back and stood up, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "You think my life is easy?" My voice shook, but not from fear. From pure, unfiltered anger. "You think I haven't sacrificed? I've put off vacations, a bigger home, even basic things I wanted just to keep sending you money. And it's never enough. You always want more." Michael rolled his eyes. "Spare me the sob story, Alice." "No, you listen to me." I turned to my parents. "You said this was about survival, that you couldn't make ends meet. I believed you. But if that's true, then where is all the money going?" Mom's face hardened. "Are you accusing us of lying?" I shook my head, laughing without humor. "I don't know. Should I be?" Dad stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His voice was sharp, cold. "If you're not willing to help anymore, Alice, then maybe you don't need to be here at all." I froze. Michael let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "Damn, you really just got kicked out on Thanksgiving." I looked at them, my parents, my brother, the people I had spent my whole life bending over backward for. And in that moment, I realized the truth. I wasn't family to them. I was an ATM. I didn't say another word. I grabbed my coat, left the brand new TV by the door and walked out. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but I welcomed it. At least it was honest. I got in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my hands ached. The drive home was a blur, my mind racing with everything that had just happened. The accusations, the demands, the way they had looked at me, like I was nothing more than a walking bank account. By the time I reached my apartment, the anger had started to fade, replaced by something heavier, something colder. I had always believed that family was about love, about support. Tonight had proven me wrong. The first few days after Thanksgiving, the first tried to move on. I buried myself in work, ignored the missed calls from my mom, and deleted every text from Michael without reading them. But no matter how much I tried to push it away, something about the whole situation just didn't add up. I had sent my parents nearly $100,000 over the past 3 years. That should have been more than enough to keep the lights on, cover groceries and take care of any emergency expenses. Yet they were acting like they were drowning, and they wanted more. But for what? The questions wouldn't leave me alone. And the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. Then, one afternoon, I ran into an old family friend at the grocery store, Mrs. Carter. She had been close with my parents for years, always the type to keep up with small-town gossip. She spotted me near the produce section, and gave me a knowing smile. "I heard about what happened at Thanksgiving," she said, lowering her voice like it was some scandalous secret. I stiffened. "Oh," she'd sixth, shaking her head. "It's a shame, really. After everything your parents did to help Michael, you'd think they'd be a little more grateful for your support." My stomach twisted. "Helping?" Mrs. Carter's brows lifted. "Oh, honey, you didn't know. They covered most of his divorce debts. Thousands of dollars just wiped away." I nearly dropped a bag of apples in my hands. That was the first I'd heard of it. My parents had always made it sound like my money was going toward their expenses. Mortgage, bills, medical costs. They never once mentioned Michael's debts. And that wasn't even the worst part. "You know, I was so surprised when your dad got that new car," she added casually. "I mean, after struggling for so long, I figured they'd hold on to their old one, but I guess things worked out." My head snapped up. "New car?" Mrs. Carter frowned. "You haven't seen it?" I hadn't. The last time I visited, their old sedan was still in the driveway. But suddenly, my dad claiming they were barely making ends meet while secretly buying a brand new car made my skin crawl. Something was seriously wrong. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my laptop screen. My fingers hovered over my banking app, heart pounding as I scrolled through the transaction history. For 3 years, I'd wired money directly to my parents' account. I never asked questions, never doubted them. But now I needed answers. I started making a list. Mortgage checked online records. Paid off months ago. Utilities called the power company. Bill wasn't nearly as high as they claimed. Medical bills pulled old statements. Covered through insurance. So where the hell was my money going? Then it hit me, Michael. I bit my lip debating whether it was worth it. But before I could talk myself out of it, I opened a new browser tab and looked up court records. And there it was, Michael's name. Case settled. Outstanding debts cleared. I sat back in my chair, stomach churning. They had lied to me. They had guilt-tripped me, manipulated me, and used me as their personal ATM not to survive, but to cover my brother's reckless mistakes and buy luxuries they had no business affording. And all the while, they made me feel like I wasn't doing enough. I clenched my fists. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive back to that house and demand an explanation. But I already knew what they'd say. "We're family. Michael needed help. You have more than he does." It wouldn't be an apology. It wouldn't be accountability. It would be justification. And I was done accepting it. I closed my laptop. My decision crystal clear. The next day I drove back to my parents' house. Not for reconciliation. Not to be guilt into another discussion. But for answers. When my mom opened the door, her expression flickered between surprise and unease. "Alice, you came back. I think we need to talk." My voice was cold, even to my own ears. My dad was in the living room, flipping through the channels like he hadn't just tried to emotionally blackmail me a few days ago. When I walked in, barely looked up. I didn't waste time. I pulled out a stack of printed statements from my bag and dropped them onto the coffee table. "I want to know where my money actually went." My mom faltered. "Alice, we already told you." "No, you told me it was for bills. For survival." "But I checked. The mortgage is already paid. The utilities." "Alice, please don't do this. We're your family. Families take care of each other. I don't know how you can just turn your back on us after everything we've done for you. Do you really care more about money than your own parents?" At first, I told myself I wouldn't respond. I wasn't going to be pulled back into the cycle. But then Michael got involved. Unlike my mother, he didn't bother with guilt. He went straight for anger. "Wow, so that's it. You're just done with us. You'd rather sit in your fancy apartment and pretend you don't have a family. You're selfish, Alice. You could help but you just don't want to. Hope your money keeps you warm at night. Good luck when you're old and alone. Don't come crawling back when you realize you screwed up." I stared at his messages, my hands trembling. Michael who had directly benefited from my money. Michael who had never thanked me, never acknowledged the sacrifices I made. Michael who had known my parents. Or lying but still sat there. At Thanksgiving, acting like I was the selfish one. I started typing, ready to unleash everything I had been holding back for years. But then I stopped. What was the point? Nothing I said would change how they saw me. They had already decided I was the villain. The cold-hearted daughter who abandoned her family. The sister who didn't care about her struggling brother. The selfish one. So I deleted the draft and did something I never thought I would do. I blocked them. My mom, my dad, Michael. All of them. And for the first time in years, my phone was silent. At first, the quiet was unsettling. I had spent so much of my life wrapped up in their needs, their struggles, their demands that I didn't know what to do with myself. I kept waiting for the guilt to hit me full force, for regret to sink in. But something strange happened instead. I started to breathe again. For the first time in years, I looked at my paycheck and realized I could actually use it for myself. No more wiring money the second it hit my account. No more pushing off things I wanted because family came first. So I did something radical. I booked a vacation. Not a work trip. Not a weekend visit to my parents. A real vacation. I went to Italy, a place I had always dreamed of visiting, but never justified spending money on. And for once, I enjoyed my life without the weight of someone else's expectations pressing down on me. I walked through ancient streets, drank an espresso in tiny cafes and took deep breaths of air that didn't feel suffocating. And while I was there, I had a realization. I wasn't a bad daughter. I wasn't selfish. I had given more than most children ever do for their parents. I had sacrificed my time, my dreams, my peace, all for people who never once considered what I might need in return. That wasn't love. That was control. And I wasn't going to live under it anymore. Months passed. I settled into my new normal. Every now and then, I'd get a random email from my mom, always framed the same way. "We miss you, Alice. Please come home." But even then, there was always a hint of expectation. "Your father and I have been struggling. If you could just send something to help, we'd be so grateful." Nothing changed. Nothing would change. And I had finally accepted that. One night, I sat on my balcony, looking out at the city skyline, sipping wine from a bottle that wasn't cheap for once. I thought about everything I had lost. But more importantly, I thought about everything I had gained. Freedom, peace, the right to put myself first. And I knew, without a doubt, that walking away had been the best decision I had ever made. Story 2. At 58, my life had finally settled into something peaceful. My husband, Robert, had just retired, and our days were filled with quiet joys: morning coffee on the porch, long walks in the evening, and tending to our small but thriving garden. Our son, Michael, was married to Sophia, a woman I had always struggled to connect with. Despite the tension between us, I held on to hope that time would ease whatever divide lay between us. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I was curled up with a book when the phone rang. "Hey, Mom," Michael's voice came through, rushed and slightly hesitant. I immediately sat up, setting my book aside. "Michael, everything okay?" Yeah, everything's fine. Just, we need a favor. Our apartment is getting renovated, and it's turning into a much bigger mess than we thought. Can Sophia and I stay with you and Dad for a few weeks?" I hesitated, glancing around our small, tidy home. Robert and I had grown used to the quiet, to the way everything had its place. Having guests, especially these guests, would be an adjustment. But this was our son. No matter how old they get, that protective instinct never really fades. "Of course," I said, already thinking about the changes we'd need to make. "Just a couple of weeks, right?" "Yeah, tops," he promised, relief evident in his voice. "Thanks, Mom. You're the best." When I told Robert later, he just sighed and wiped his hands on his gardening apron. "Well, I suppose I could use an extra pair of hands around here. When are they coming?" "This weekend," I said, already making a mental list of what we needed to prepare. "We'd better stock up on coffee, then. You know how Michael is in the mornings." I laughed. "I'll add it to the list." By Saturday, our quiet home had been turned upside down. Michael and Sophia arrived with more bags than I expected, filling up the guest room and spilling into other areas of the house. "Thanks for letting us stay," Michael said, dropping a heavy suitcase with a thud. "You know you're always welcome here," I replied, glancing at Sophia. She offered a tight smile, her eyes scanning the space, as if assessing whether it met her standards. We had barely settled into this new arrangement before tension started simmering beneath the surface. Michael worked long hours, leaving Sophia home for most of the day. At first, I thought we'd find some common ground, maybe even bond a little. But instead of helping with the household tasks, she spent her afternoon scrolling through her phone, watching TV, or leaving her things scattered around like we had a maid on staff. One afternoon, after tripping over yet another pair of her band and shoes, I finally had enough. I found her sprawled on the couch, eyes glued to her phone. "Sophia," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm, "do you think you could start picking up after yourself? maybe even help around the house. But she looked up, blinking at me as if I had just asked her to move mountains. I'm a guest, Linda. I don't do chores in my in-laws' house. That's not how it works. I stared at her, speechless. In this house, I said, voice steady, everyone contributes. This isn't a hotel. She simply shrugged and went back to her phone. That night, I decided to take a stand in my own way. I cooked dinner just for Robert and me. When Michael came home and saw only 2 plates set at the table, his confusion quickly turned to frustration. What's this about, Mom? Why aren't there plates for me and Sophia? I met his gaze. My expression firm. Your wife seems to think she's at a 5-star resort, where meals and cleaning are part of package. This is a home, Michael. We all pitch in. Michael's face flushed. A mix of embarrassment and anger. That's not fair. We're guests. No, son. Your family, I said, holding my ground. And in this family, we help each other. If that's not something you can do, maybe a hotel is a better option after all. Michael turned to Sophia, who sat stiffly, arms crossed. After a long pause, he sighed. Fine. We'll help out. Sophia said nothing, just nodded with all the enthusiasm of someone being forced into manual labor. But I didn't care because for the first time since they arrived, I felt like I was taking my home back. Weeks passed. And while Michael made an effort, Sophia remained indifferent. The weight of maintaining the house, managing meals and tiptoeing around their moods was exhausting. One evening, as I sat beside Robert in the living room, I let out a long sigh. We need a break. Robert sat down his book. What do you have in mind? That hotel by the ocean you always talk about. I said, let's book it. For the first time in weeks, his face lit up. Let's do it. Telling Michael and Sophia didn't go as smoothly. You're going on vacation? Michael asked, his tone edged with disbelief. Why? You guys are always at home. I stiffened at his words. Even people who stay at home need a break. Michael, especially with all the extra work we've been doing. Instead of understanding, his response floored me. Instead of wasting money on a vacation, you could help us out more. He said, we need new furniture for the apartment. I stared at him, speechless. I had raised this boy, given him everything. And here he was, acting like we owed him something. I can't believe you're saying this. I said, finally, my voice tight. Your father and I are going. That's final. And so we went. And it was perfect. The sound of the waves, the sunsets, the peaceful walks, it reminded Robert and me of the world beyond our daily struggles. But coming home felt like stepping into a disaster zone. Pizza boxes stacked on the counters. Empty bottles on the floor. A layer of dust over everything. It looked like a tornado had hit. Michael, the first, called out, my voice echoing through the chaos. He and Sophia merged, looking sheepish. Why didn't you clean up? I asked, struggling to keep my anger in check. Sophia shrugged. No one pays me to clean. Robert and I exchanged a look. This wasn't just about a messy house. This was about respect. This is not a hotel. Robert said, his voice firm. You're not guests. This is your home as much as it is ours. Michael looked down, finally understanding how far they had pushed us. Sorry, Mom, Dad. We'll clean it up now. But the damage was done. Our home, our sanctuary, had been treated like a crash pad, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. Christmas was approaching, and as I pulled out the decorations, I realized something. For years I had fought to hold on to our traditions to keep our family together. But maybe it was time to let go. The tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. Michael and Sophia were still here, still treating our home like a free hotel, and my patience was wearing thin. Christmas was coming, and normally I'd be filled with excitement decorating the house, baking, making sure everything felt warm and festive. But this year it felt different. Robert and I had always loved Christmas, and I wanted to hold on to that joy, no matter how strained things felt. So, I forced a smile and pulled out the decorations. Let's make the house look festive. I told Robert, maybe it'll lighten the mood. Worth a shot, he said, though his tone held more doubt than hope. I asked Michael and Sophia if they wanted to help, but Michael just shrugged. Actually, we were planning to go to the mountains for Christmas. Just the two of us. I froze. Oh, Sophia, who had been silent up until now, smirked. Yeah, we figured a change of scenery would be nice. It's now like we're missing much here, right? The words hit harder than I expected. I swallowed down the hurt and forced a polite smile. That sounds lovely. I hope you enjoy it. Robert gave me a look, but didn't say anything. He knew me well enough to know how much this stung. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. We had taken them in, fed them, given them a place to stay. Hell, I had put up with Sophia and this was the thanks we got. I turned to Robert. Let's get them lottery tickets for Christmas. He raised an eyebrow. Lottery tickets? It's a small, fun gift, I said. Besides, maybe it'll bring us some luck. Robert chuckled. Why not? At this point, we could use some. I'm Christmas Eve. I carefully wrapped the lottery tickets in festive paper and handed them out as we all sat in the living room. The go, I said with a smile, trying to inject some warmth into the moment. Michael looked at his with mild confusion. Sophia, on the other hand, barely glanced at hers, before tossing it onto the coffee table with a scoff. Lottery tickets? She said, laughing under her breath. Seriously, that's what you got us? I felt my stomach drop, but I kept my voice steady. It's just for fun, Sophia. You never know, maybe you'll win something. Michael, catching on to our mood, shrugged and set his envelope aside. Thanks, Mom, but this isn't really our thing. I stared at them for a long moment, then quietly picked up the discarded tickets. All right then, I said, my voice even. No harm done. Robert and I will keep them. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced small talk and strained smiles. The warmth I had tried so hard to hold on to was gone, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly done trying. A few days later, Robert and I scratched the tickets over breakfast. I wasn't expecting anything. It was just a silly little gift, something to lighten the mood. But as I checked the numbers, my hands started to shake. Robert, I whispered, my voice barely there. I think we just won. He frowned. Won what? I pushed the ticket toward him. He read the numbers once, then again, then a third time, and then he let out a low whistle. $500,000. He murmured. I just stared at the ticket, my mind racing. We had spent our entire lives working hard, budgeting, saving, and now we had options. We could travel, buy a new home, do whatever we wanted. And the funniest part, the tickets had been meant for Michael and Sophia. Word got out quickly, probably because Robert couldn't stop grinning. Michael and Sophia heard about our wins soon enough, and it didn't take long before Michael came knocking. His face makes a forced excitement and barely hidden expectation. Mom, Dad, wow, I heard about the lottery, congratulations. Thank you, I said, keeping my voice light. He hesitated, then cleared his throat. So, when do we get our share? I blinked. Excuse me, Michael gave a small awkward laugh. I mean, technically, those tickets were meant for us, right? Sophia, standing beside him, chimed in. Yeah, you gave them to us as a gift. Doesn't that mean we're entitled to at least part of winnings? I folded my arms. You rejected those tickets, tossed them aside, made it clear, they weren't worth your time. Michael smiled, faltered. But still, Mom, no, I said it calmly, firmly. Robert nodded beside me. We're keeping the money. And while we're at it, we think it's time you to find your own place. Your apartment has been finished for weeks. Sophia's face turned red. You can't be serious. Michael looked between us, realization sinking in. But Mom, no, Michael. The first said, my voice soft, but resolute. It's time. Michael clenched his jaw, but nodded stiffly. Fine. One more month. One more month, I agreed. That's it. But I wasn't done. Because something about their reaction, about the way they reacted, left me uneasy. And when I accidentally brushed against Sophia's laptop later that night, bringing the screen to life, my gut told me, I was right to be suspicious. Because there, on the screen, were open tabs. Legal advice on declaring someone incompetent. Understanding first-line errors in inheritance claims. I felt the chill run down my spine. Sophia, I murmured. Tom walked in, noticing my expression. What is it? I pointed at the screen. Look at this. He frowned, reading through the tabs. Are they planning to take legal control of our assets? I don't know, I whispered. But we can't ignore it. Robert's face hardened. Then we need to protect ourselves. We met with a lawyer the next morning. Quietly, carefully, we updated our will, added extra security to our accounts, took every precaution we could, and then we played along. We smiled at breakfast. We chatted about our upcoming plans. We acted like nothing had changed. Because if Michael and Sophia were planning something, we needed them to think we didn't see it coming. That Saturday morning, we set a hidden recording device in the living room before heading out for a walk. When we came back, we played the audio, and what we heard made my blood run cold. Sophia, voice low but confident, explaining how certain drugs could be used to incapacitate us. How, if done right, they could claim we were legally incompetent and take control of everything. And Michael didn't stop her. He didn't argue. He didn't even hesitate. Robert reached for my hand. His grip firm. "We can't confront them yet," he said. "We have to be smart." I swallowed hard and nodded. "Then let's make sure they never see it coming." Betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it sneaks in quietly, disguised as love, hidden in the people you thought would always be in your corner. Sitting in our bedroom that night, listening to the recording of our own son, agreeing to a plan to drug us and take our assets, I felt something inside me snap. This wasn't just selfishness anymore. It wasn't just entitlement. It was malice. And I wasn't going to let it slide. Robert and I spent the next day carefully setting our plan into motion. We couldn't confront them directly. Not yet. Now, without making sure we had them exactly where we needed them. So we did something neither of them would expect. We acted normal. Over breakfast, I smiled at Michael like nothing was wrong. I thanked Sophia when she handed me a cup of tea. I even brought up our upcoming trip, making sure they knew we'd be out of the house soon. "We're going on a cruise," I said, stirring my coffee. "A long one. We need a break." Michael and Sophia exchanged a glance. I didn't miss the way her lips curled into the slightest smirk. Perfect. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, the doorbell rang. So Sophia, too confident for her own good, got up to answer it and froze. Because standing there in full uniform were two police officers. "Good evening," one of them said, stepping past her into the house. "We received a report of a planned crime taking place here. We'd like to ask a few questions." Sophia's face drained of color. Michael walked in, frowning. "What's going on?" I stood up slowly, my voice calm. "Measure. We'd like you to analyze something for us." I told the officers, gesturing to the tea. Sophia had poured just minutes earlier, so Sophia lunged for the kettle. But the officer was faster, securing it before she could get her hands on it. That was when the panic set in. Wait, this is ridiculous." Sophia's voice was shaking. "You can't seriously believe." But then the second officer pulled out a recorder and pressed play. Their voices filled the room. Sophia explaining how easy it would be to drug us. How Michael just needed to go along with it. How, if done right, we'd never see it coming. Michael's weak, hesitant agreement. The way they laughed. Sure, we would never suspect a thing. The color drained from Michael's face. "Mom," I held up a hand, cutting him off. Don't. His mouth opened and closed. There was nothing left to say. The officers placed Sophia in handcuffs first. She thrashed, her perfect little facade shattering in an instant. "You set us up," she shrieked, eyes burning with fury. "You sneaky, pathetic." She didn't get to finish before they dragged her outside. Michael wasn't cuffed. Not yet. But as he stood there, looking lost and so small, I realized something. I didn't feel sorry for him. Not even a little. The legal process moved quickly. There was too much evidence for them to talk their way out of it. Sophia was charged with attempted elder abuse and fraud. Michael, while not the mastermind, was complicit enough to face consequences of his own. The marriage didn't survive. Michael moved to another city far from the mess he had created. And honestly, I didn't care where he went because he wasn't my son anymore. Not really. Not after what he had done. Robert and I sold the house. Too many bad memories. Too many ghosts. With the lottery money and fresh start, we moved into a beautiful home by the coast, somewhere peaceful, somewhere that felt ours. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch, watching the waves roll in, my phone buzzed a message from Michael. "Mom, I'm sorry." I stared at the screen for a long moment. And then I deleted the message. Because some doors once closed, should stay closed. Robert raised his glass, smiling at me. "To beginnings," I clinked mine against his. "New beginnings." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I finally let go of the past, and it felt good.